Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals, I'm running for the legislature. I was down there for more years than anybody else, 46. It's a record that can never be broken. Because I was such a pain in the neck and other parts of the anatomy for those white people, the ones throughout the state decided that the only way they'd get me out of the legislature is to vote for term limits. And the way that works is that a person cannot serve more than 2 terms together and then has to be removed from the legislature because 8 years were served. Well, after you sit out 4 years or a full term, you can come back. I was term limited twice. The first time I was term limited, I stayed out my 4 years. I came back, and my first words were, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by term limits, I was term limited out, and I told people this time around that if my mind is clear, my health is good, I'll consider the possibility of running. And many people took that as a commitment, that if my health is good, which it is, if my mind is clear, I believe it is, ZYXWPSRQPONMLKJIHGFEDCBA, then I would consider running. Well, the pressure built up, and because I've lived in this community all of my life, I'm 86, I will be 87 July 10th. I acceded or yielded, and I filed a day or so, maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, for re-election. And I'm going to do some giving of information of things that I did while I was in the legislature, because people may not know specifically. Rather than relate these things by just narrating, I decided I would read articles that appeared throughout the years describing what I did and how. Now, I will give myself credit. I've never been one to say I am not up to the job. In fact, I have a little rhyme that I put together. Nothing is so sad or so forlorn as a car that will not toot its own horn. This particular item is dated April 17th, 2005. You can calculate how many years ago that was. This is 2024. This item was from 2005, and it was headlined, Obligation to Continue. Ernie Chambers' tenure in the Nebraska legislature is a record. This article appeared in the Omaha World Herald. By the way, who endorsed the person running against me? I guess that jinxed that person. Next week, State Ernie Chambers becomes Nebraska's longest-serving state senator, and it's a record that can't be broken due to term limits. On April 25th, the Omahawan will surpass the record of Jerome Warner, who served 34 years, 3 months, and 19 days before dying in office April 20th, 1997, at age 69. He died younger than I am now. So when people talk about my age, I point out that there are graves for babies, graves for teenagers, graves for younger people, graves for people of all ages, and we never know when the grim reaper is going to harvest us. But I don't feel his cold breath on the back of my neck, and I don't feel his bony fingers holding my hand. But to continue, Chambers, 67, has seen 8 governors come and go. For much of his tenure, he was Nebraska's only black lawmaker. He fought to get black representatives on Omaha City Council and School Board by passing bills to establish elections by district for both. Some people don't realize that. He has sought to repeal Nebraska's death penalty. His repeal bill was passed in 1979, only to be vetoed by then Governor Charles Stone. People thought this last time, a few years ago when I got it passed, was the first time. I had managed to persuade those conservative, white, Midwestern people to pass a bill to abolish the death penalty, but the governor vetoed it. I could not get the votes to override. But here's the irony. The very day that he vetoed that bill, my bill to elect one of the entities in Omaha by district, the school board, the city council, also went to his desk. People were sure it would be vetoed because he and I didn't get along. He signed it. Some of them talked to him and said it would be too much, it would be too obvious if you'd veto two of his major bills, which it took almost a miracle to pass in the first place. If you vetoed them both the same day, it wouldn't do you good. So that bill was finally enacted after having been vetoed by about 4 times prior to that. In conversations with the World Herald last week, Chambers discussed his decades of service and what may be his legacy. Other people talked about legacy. I never did. I told him that's too high on the anatomy. Maybe a footacy or a soulacy, no legacy. No looking back with regret. No, those schoolgirl days of biting nails and long lost something must end. But anyway, why did you run for the legislature? That was the question. Answer. I really didn't decide on one of those things I had wanted to do. People had asked me to run against Senator George Althouse, a black man who represented the district, when he stood up and said words to the effect that God put white people in charge and we're supposed to follow along behind them. People were outraged. Even when I was a young man, in my late teens, I would go before the city council, speak for our issues, help people when they were harassed by the police, and that was something even grown black men were afraid to do. But I simply had no fear. Some people said it was not a lack of fear, it was a lack of sense, but the outcome was the same. I had a reputation for being willing to stand up against overwhelming odds, not turn tail and run. Next question. Did you think you would stay 35 years? Answer. I had no intention of giving that many years of my life to a job like this. But once I got here and saw what needed to be done, I felt an obligation to continue. Question. You got district elections for the Douglas County Board, Omaha City Council, and Omaha School Board. Other accomplishments? Answer. Getting rid of corporal punishment in the schools. That means something to me. At Horace Mann and some elementary schools in the black community, they have paddles. I should have brought one to show you that they beat our children with. This guy who was the principal was named Barbie, and he would turn them, bend them over, pull up their dress, and hit them on the backside. And when I found out, I was furious. And I'm not going to go into how long and how I got that done, but it was not done in white schools, and I finally got it outlawed for all schools and the legislature. Believe it or not, the black teachers opposed my effort to get rid of punishment, physical punishment for our children. The Ministerial Alliance, comprising black ministers, were in favor of the corporal punishment, but they didn't want anybody going upside their rear end or their head physically. I guess being what they call a lost soul and a black militant firebrand, whatever that meant, I was not surprising anybody by being against such a black tradition of letting our children be beaten by white people and some ignorant Negroes. But to continue, Getting rid of corporal punishment in the schools, that means something to me. And the 2 death penalty items that I did get passed into law meant something, and some people are aware of it. One was that nobody who had committed the killing prior to 18th birthday could be subject to the death penalty, nor could anybody who in those days we said was mentally retarded. As a result of that bill, 2 such persons, mentally retarded as they were called, were removed from death row. Can you imagine executing people who are certified to be mentally ill? Those are the ones that Nebraska wanted to kill. Those were the ones that I was able to rescue. And these young people, none of them could be executed. So I told people, if I were a hippopotamus with a mouth that big, I would take a bushel basket of apples and swallow them in one gulp. But since I'm not a hippopotamus, I have to consume the apple one bite at the time. I was never disheartened, never discouraged, and my philosophy is never to give up, never to quit, always believe in myself. To be ferocious when necessary, implacable, which means face down whatever I had to, and to be relentless. Those were my watchwords, and I didn't do it with a frown. Sometimes I frown. Some people said I'm just ugly. Ugly is in the eye of the beholder. But anyway, I would always tell people, nobody can treat me better than I will treat them. So if there's to be anything approaching what is called a relationship, you will determine the footing for it. Treat me the way you want to be treated, and nobody can treat me better than I will treat anybody. Continuing. Oh, the 2 death penalty items. Other things that I've done. I doubt those things will be undone, but there are other things that I've done which might be undone when I no longer was in the legislature. Question: is your focus on the death penalty an achievement? Answer: the ultimate thing has not been accomplished yet. That's its abolition. Question: you fought racism throughout your career. How do things compare to 1970? And remember, this article was printed 2005. Answer: there have been presidential executive orders, congressional enactments, court decisions aimed at alleviating racism, yet racism is as deeply entrenched, it is more virulent now than it was. And because of that, I would explain that the constitutional provision that says anybody born or naturalized in this country is a citizen. We were born here, and we're not citizens yet. A white person can get off the boat from Europe on Friday, and I, who've lived in this country all my life, would be approaching him Monday to try to get him to give me a job. That's a slight overstatement, but you use examples to make the point. Continuing. Question: you've introduced a number of bills for gay employment rights. Why is that an issue you have pushed? Answer: when I was growing up, I didn't know what a homosexual was. Even as an adult, I didn't think too much about it. Whenever the police took out after a group, however, it would catch my attention. But that wasn't enough by itself. Senator Tim Hall of Omaha brought a bill that dealt with non-discrimination in the workplace against gay and lesbian people. They called it the LGBT community then. They didn't add the Q and the plus. I know how hateful people are, and I told Tim that as hateful as these people are, when you bring about a bill, I don't think a person should bring a bill like that and be the only name on it. so I put my name on it too. And I was one of the strongest supporters ever since. Question: why require strict liability in police chases? Answer: I had seen in Omaha all kinds of chases. At first, I talked to the mayor and others about getting rid of these chases. It was capped when the cops were chasing a guy who went through a stop sign, hit a teacher's car, and killed him. The teacher left a widow and 4 children. I said, since the cities are not going to regulate these chases, I need to find some way to compensate innocent third parties who are hurt. And here's how that went. You could sue, but you would have to prove that the cop was negligent in the way he or she was driving in the pursuit. They never said the pursuit itself showed negligence, so nobody ever could win. I did not base my law on any negligence by the officer. And my argument was, if these high-speed chases are deemed by the public to be a legitimate method of law enforcement, then I'm not going to make the cop personally liable. They don't have anything anyway. I'm going to make the city for the city cop, the county for the sheriff, the state for the state patrol. If an innocent third party is injured or killed in a police chase, that meant the person being pursued or the pursuing officer caused the injury. The entity for which that pursuing officer worked would have to pay. And down through the years, people have collected. Just a few months ago, a family was paid over $400,000 by the state because of a loved one being killed while being pursued by a member of the state patrol. These are things I looked out to the extent I could for everybody's welfare. Those who nobody else seemed to care about were my particular province. As I say, the least, the last, and the lost. Continuing this article. How about your races for governor, attorney general, and the U.S. Senate? Nobody had even run for those 3 offices, but I ran for all 3 of them, not at the same time. But in one instance, I was running for the governorship and the legislature at the same time, and it was taken to court by somebody. The lawyer was incompetent. But anyway, the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled that a person cannot run for 2 offices at the same time. So I called a press conference, and everybody was sure that I would leave my name on the ballot for the legislature and not run for the Senate. So I said, oh no, you think you know everything? You think you know me, but you don't know me at all. I'm going to leave my name on the ballot for the U.S. Senate, and I'm going to remove my name for the legislature. And their eyes got big. They said, you're not running for the legislature? I said, oh yeah, I can run for both offices, but I can have my name on the ballot for only one of them. I will have to run for the legislature by write-in. They said, well, nobody has ever won a seat to the legislature by write-in. I said, there's always a first. Somebody has to be first. I don't mind being first. So I launched a sort of campaign which consisted of printing brochures telling people that I was running for the legislature by write-in and that they would have to write my name on the ballot. So when they get to the part that says legislature, there would be a blank line, and that's where you write in the name. Try to spell my name correctly, but under the law, if it's a close enough approximation, then it will be counted. But people were sure that I couldn't win by writing because nobody had done it before. But there has to be a first, and I don't mind being first when it's something of value. Obviously, I didn't win the seat for U.S. Senate. I was running against Bob Kerrey, and my name was on the ballot. But I won the seat in the legislature by write-in, which was the first time that had ever been done, and the first time that a person did it while running with his name on the ballot for a different office. There are things I've done that people don't know about, and many people don't care about. I'm the kind of person who, in the minds of some people, can do no right, no matter what it is. And I have not lived my life based on what other people think, how they feel about me, or what they say about me. I have a conscience of my own. I have a brain of my own. I have eyes of my own. I have eyes with which to see the world. I have a brain with which to analyze the world. And I have a determination to do what I believe is right, and I don't care what people think. Their thoughts don't hurt me. They haven't even thought things through. They cannot think well enough to run their own life. How are they going to run mine? They're not. Let me continue. Oh, but that question was, how about your races for governor, attorney general, and the Senate? Answer, those were for the purpose of raising issues and focusing discussion. I've never believed I could win an office where white people would have to vote for me in large numbers. They couldn't vote yes for me on anything, but they could vote yes on a proposition to get me out of the legislature, and that was term limits. Because of term limits, Chambers will not be able to run for re-election in 2008, which was 3 years off from when this article appeared. But I ridiculed them. I said, to get rid of one black man, you were willing to get rid of 47 white people. So you deem one black man of more power than 47 of you all. If that was my view, I guess I'd do it the same way you're doing it. But having the intelligence that I have, I would be ashamed to admit to my enemy that one of them was of more power and merit than 47 of us. And then I'd cap it, or as they say, put the cherry on top of the sundae by telling them, if Alibaba can handle 40 thieves, I should be able to handle 47 white people. I never took low, I never bit my tongue, and nobody would ever be ashamed of me, who is black, unless they were Toms, Jemimas, and whatnots, but they wouldn't be ashamed because I would not stand up and speak when I should speak, and when most people of all races, nationalities, and sexual orientation were afraid to even whimper. Let me continue. Question, have you always been an independent? Answer, there was one time that I registered as a Democrat so I could vote in the primary for Jesse Jackson. I was in the New Alliance Party so I could be their candidate and discuss the issues that nobody would discuss. So again, I registered for that party. And then there was a short time I was a Republican. I did that to irritate them. The senators around here in those years used to have their little private meetings. When I became a Republican, I could go to the meetings, and I told them they were duller than a convention of undertakers, so they didn't have to worry about me coming anymore, and I changed my registration back to independent. Question, did you ever think it best to hold your tongue? Answer, anytime there's an issue there that I think needs to be addressed, I would never hold my tongue. The only time I might hold my tongue is when I'm talking to student groups. They're not in here lying, yielding to lobbyists, sponging and mooching off the lobbyists, and doing things I think are inappropriate, failing to use the power they have to do good. And I always treated young people, and especially infants and toddlers and others, differently from the way I treated older people who knew better. Why have you never worn a suit and tie? That was such a worry for white people, and that in itself was enough, but that wasn't the reason. Why have you never worn a suit and tie? Answer, because I don't want to. On some issues, I'm as transparent as a sheet of window glass, and that was my reason. I didn't want to. but I did create one. I was a barber, and if wearing a sweatshirt and jeans were good enough for the people who gave me my living, they were certainly good enough for those who deemed themselves my enemies and comported themselves so. And clothes do not make the man or the woman. However, the man and the woman can make clothes. Let me continue. Was it hard on your children for you to be in the public eye? Answer: they never told me that it was, but I know there were things they heard that they didn't like. But some of what I am rubbed off on them. I used to take my kids to cemeteries when they were little so they wouldn't be afraid of ghosts and dead people. I didn't want them to be full of superstition. I took them to horror movies, drive-ins in those days. I would explain that this stuff is just a movie. When a monster was there, I'd say, see that monster? Well, there are people back here like we're sitting in this car, and they have a camera, and they're taking the picture. That is a person made up to look like that in the way that people do on Halloween, but they're not real. Continuing. They knew I had a sense of humor. They'd ask me, quote, Daddy, why don't you pray over your food? I'd say, well, I don't need to. If anything, I'll thank your mother, 'cause she's the one who cooked it. They'd look at each other and laugh. They'd look at their mother. Sometimes she didn't want to laugh, but she would. Then they put in parentheses, Chambers and his wife, Jacqueline, were divorced many years ago. She died in the year 2000. They never saw me disrespect her, raise my voice or my hand or anything like that. I wanted my children to see in me an example of the way I thought they should live. Question: you went to law school. Why not become a lawyer? Answer: the only reason I finished law school was because I started it. It became a principle in and of itself that I had to finish what I started. Being in a courtroom is something like a taxi cab where you're more or less obliged to accept every fare, which I wouldn't do. That was not the kind of activity that would have given me a sense of fulfillment. Judging me by other people's standards could result in a conclusion that my life has been virtually wasted. I don't have a lot of money. I'm not highly respected by many people. I don't have a good reputation in the minds of a lot of people. I don't have any social standing or status in the eyes of most people. I belong to no organization. I don't go to church, no political parties, or do I seek their backing. I'm a loner. That makes my life very uncomplicated. I only have one person to please. Now, he's hard to please, but I know what pleases him. And if he's pleased, everything's all right with the world. And as I say, that's when I lay my head on that pillow at night and I sleep the sleep of the just. What you're listening to and watching is the person who's running to get back in the legislature. If you think I'm fit, vote for me. If you think otherwise, then vote foolishly. As the song says, though, but if you lose me, oh yes, you lose a good thing. Check that out by somebody who sang it. Question: what about politicians you've known, such as Governor Jim Exon? Answer: I got along with him probably more than I did any of the others because he came closer to being what he seemed to be. We would talk very strongly about it and against each other. One time I even offered to wrestle him for charity. Now, he was a big man, but I would have done it. And see, when what they deem to be a small man issues a public challenge, they think he must know something. And in wrestling, you don't punch, you grapple. He didn't know how strong I was. He didn't know anything about that. But he knew that when it came to determination and standing up, nobody could match me in that, and certainly nobody could outdo me. And I'm not boasting. Telling the truth is not boasting. One time I even offered to wrestle him for charity because he was talking about the death penalty or something, and he had irritated me to that point. Question: what about Bob Kerrey? He was the one I'd run against when my name was on the ballot for Senate. Once on the east side of the Capitol building, there were about 3 or 4 little white boys from the Catholic school or somewhere sitting out there with me, and I saw Carrie coming. Children seemed attracted to me, and it was a Catholic school, but even though the Catholic adults probably hated me, the children didn't. They even brought me some rolls one day, and the package was open, and there was some dirt that had gotten into the package. Naturally, I wasn't going to eat them, but I thanked the little boys, and I told them they really were nice, and I appreciated what they did. Because one time they were in trouble, they had no place to go, so they came to my office, and I interceded for them. I can't help it. Children are my heart if I had a heart, which I don't have. And I tell people that, told them that I'd gone for a physical examination, and this nurse put the stethoscope right here where your heart's supposed to be. And she got a strange look on her face. And she said, now, I don't mean anything by this, but can I put this on your arm? I said, well, if that's where your heart is. So she put it on the inner side of my bicep. She listened. I thought she was listening. She got a strange look on her face, and then she called the doctor. I don't remember what happened after that, but ever since then I told people I don't have a heart. And I can document it because when they checked me for it, I didn't have it. They couldn't find it. And they're the ones who know how to find a heart. Now, she didn't say I didn't have a heart, but obviously she didn't find a heartbeat. And I've never seen my heart. I've never seen the heart that's in me if I have one. How do I know? I don't. But we draw conclusions based on things that generally happen a certain way and based on the things we're taught. We're all taught that a heart is the organ that pumps the blood through the arteries, out through the body. The blood goes out, and then when it comes through the lungs, it's oxygenated. That means it gets oxygen, goes back to the heart, and that's the circulatory system. That's what they taught me as early as grade school. But whether I have a heart or not, if I did swear, I couldn't swear to it. But people say that when it comes to children, I demonstrate I have a heart. I say, well, I don't know that that's true because Adolf Eichmann had a heart, documented to have a heart, and he said he would jump into his grave laughing, knowing that he had killed 6 million Jews or presided over the killing of 6 million. But when they went down to one of those countries in Latin America, and they captured him. He was going by the name Clements or something, but the Israeli Mossad, or whatever they call them, I call them the butchers, the modern day Nazis. They tracked him down there. They're tricky people. They injected him with a drug. They brought him onto the airplane in a stretcher. They lied and said they were doctors and they were taking him for treatment. Well, they took him back to Israel. They put him on trial. And from what I've read about the trial, he was in a glass cage, glass enclosure, like in Russia they put people. And they said invariably, when people came in for the first time, they were shocked at what they saw. They didn't see a hulking, glowering guy with those thick eyebrows that came together in the middle of their forehead over their nose. He was a person of medium height, medium build, wore eyeglasses, and could have been an innocent accountant. He didn't look like what he was if the facts they put forth were true. A guy, he was a lawyer's name, last name was High Levi, who represented him. I read about the trial. He put on the best defense that he could for somebody like Eichmann. And he wasn't justifying anything, but he took every shred of what could be called evidence that would mitigate or lessen the seriousness, the ugliness of what Eichmann had done. Nevertheless, Eichmann was found guilty to nobody's surprise. He was hanged until he was dead, and maybe an extra amount of time to be sure. his body was cremated, and the ashes were spread in the Mediterranean Sea. How many of you all knew that? I read history. Malcolm X said, and he was telling the truth, history is the subject best suited to reward our efforts. One of these days I'm going to talk about the so-called Holocaust. And as I've said several times in this time slot, there are people who feel that the Jews the Israelis learned all of the bad things from the so-called Holocaust, and the Jews who wound up going to that part of the country known as Palestine and stealing the land from the Palestinians, there was no Israel. There was no Israel until 1948. Israel declared itself to be the Jewish state. And to do so, they displaced Palestinians, stole their land, abused the people. You can see how they are literally slaughtering them now. They have created starvation in Gaza. I had described for people so they would understand what was happening the situation like a large, long sock. It's called the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinians up here in the north were driven farther and farther south by bombing. Now the Israelis had airplanes, they had bombs, they had rockets, they had tanks, they had artillery. The Palestinians had none of that. Nobody armed them. It was not a fair fight and was not designed to be. It was to be a slaughter, and it was. These Israelis have attacked refugee camps. They have attacked schools. They have attacked hospitals, killing civilians, many, many women and children. They learned all of the worst things from the Nazis, and they're carrying them out with a vengeance. Pussyfooting Biden had said, well, if they would use these weapons of offense against the Palestinians, I will cut that off. We're not going to send them these 2-ton, that's 2,000 pounds, these 2-ton, that'd be 4,000, huh? Anyway, these 2-ton bombs, because they could only be used offensively. Those are the only weapons he withheld. Netanyahu talked about Biden like he's got a tail because he knew that Biden is afraid of the power of the Jews in this country. They do control a lot of the money. They control a lot of the communication system. Every place where a lot of money is at stake, a lot of power, you will find Jewish fingers and Jewish hands. And I'm not one of those who will say every Jew is bad, that every Jew has money, got it through cheating and lying. Other people say it. I don't know that for a fact, so I will not and cannot say that. I cannot condemn all of any group. I cannot even condemn all of the Germans who were in the war under Hitler and were members of his Gestapo, the Geheim Staatspolizei, or however they pronounce it in German. But that's what the Gestapo was, the secret police. The SS, the Schutzstaffel, was the death head group. They were the ones who operated the death camps. They were the ones who could commit and did commit the mass murders. They murdered young Jews. Why would they do it? Well, young Jews grow up to be old Jews. Little Jews grow up to be big Jews. And that seems to be the lesson that Netanyahu and his type learned in attacking Palestinians. Now they've driven them down to the toe of the sock. Down here in this part. No place to go. And the Jews are continuing airstrikes, using tanks, and wanted to use even heavier weaponry against these people. Now, I'm not going to lose my way and get off into that like I have in the past. I'm supposed to be indicating to you all, if you're still listening, some of the things I did while I was in the legislature telling you something about that record and saying that I intend to do the same thing if I go back. The youngster running against me had given an interview and said that I'm not speaking of me. He's not the only one who can stop this runaway train, because that's what was said. When I was removed from the legislature by term limits, the brakeman was gone from the runaway train. He said, you need the votes. That's true. You need the votes. But if you don't have the votes, you don't get votes by whining and crying and begging and pleading. How did I get votes? I stopped them from being able to vote. I did not filibuster, meaning reading from the phone book or recipes. I used arguments. I based mine on the rules. I educated them about Constitution, Black history, their wrongfulness throughout the history of this country, the fact, among other things, that George Washington had so many slaves that when the South seceded from the Union, they said George Washington was their patron because he owned so many slaves. And they don't want that taught. These white people in the schools today, they don't want the truth taught. That's the only way they can get people to still celebrate George Washington's birthday. They call it President's Day now. And he wasn't the only one. Thomas Jefferson, the one who did a lot of the writing of the Declaration of Independence, was a slaveholder. And you know what he said? Our children watch this, and they learn all of the worst things. They don't want to do honest labor because it's connected to what slaves do. And he concluded that little recitation by saying, because white people like him and enslaved black people, I tremble for my country when I recall that God is just, but he didn't fear God's justice enough to free his slaves. And you think they weren't raping black women, black girls? Thomas Jefferson had a teenager named Sally Hemings who he traveled over to France with as an ambassador. This young black girl in tow. That's what was happening to us. Treated like cows, pigs, and chickens. Auctioned in the same way. When black men and women were standing up there being sold, they'd walk up to a woman, check her teeth, feel her breasts. They could even grope her. That's what they did. And you're going to tell me you think these white Christians would not do such a thing? Then where did we get all these half-white black people? A lot of white men were jumping fences in those days and continue to this day. The truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Not just merely knowing it. The truth will infuriate you to the point where you will, by any means necessary, obtain full freedom, justice, and equality. And that's what we have to spend our time trying to get. And I was telling you what I would tell this young black man when I engaged in extended debate, because he had said they filibustered, but they couldn't stop things. Well, what I did wasn't filibustering. I always called mine extended debate because I always gave historical lessons. I talked about the law, the Constitution, presidential proclamations, civil rights laws, court opinions. I was instructing. And that didn't give me votes, but it stopped them from voting. They couldn't use their votes because they couldn't bring anything to a vote because I was engaged in extensive debate, not filibustering. So what they would do is say, Ernie, what must we do to be saved? I said, here's what you've got to do. I've got amendments. We'll put these amendments on your bill and I'll let you at least get a vote on it, but I'm still going to oppose it. However, I won't dig my heels in and stop it entirely. If with these changes I'm suggesting, I'll still speak against the bill. I don't want to stop everything that's passing because some of them have good parts in them. If you can overcome my opposition, then you will get your vote. but I will not stop you from getting a vote. And that's what I did with their rules. I stopped a vote from being taken. And although I didn't have the votes at first, they couldn't use theirs. And the youngster who's there now doesn't understand these things, and maybe he will learn. But we'll just have to see. I have a record, and I'm going to begin to lay that out, not just by me saying it, but by reading articles. I'll give you the news publication. I will give you the date, and you can check it for yourself. You will see there were national items, international, every kind of imagined and imaginable means of communication had taken note of what I did. One outfit even in Washington, the state of Washington, it's called, I forget what it is, I'll bring the article. I was listed among one of the top 40 people in the United States of America. Nobody from Nebraska ever had that happen. No Nebraska member of the legislature ever was put into the congressional record except me. I'm going to lay out my record. Since I'm running, I should give you a reason to select me over the other person. And I'm not running against the person. In fact, he was in the parade for Juneteenth, and so was I. And when I saw him, he was out there, but he's kind of by himself. So, and I'm the elder statesman. I walked along, then I walked out into the middle of the street, and I put my arm around his shoulder, and I walked with him in the part of the parade that was for him. And I told him, I do these things so people will know that I'm not running against you. I'm running because I think there's a job that I can do. And then I got out of the parade because I was an official part of it. I think my time is running out. And as I always say at the end, if I think about it, quoting the canary, when he saw that the door to the cage was open, I'm out of here.
You've been watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communications production.